All right, so buckle up because today we are diving into Vivek Ramaswamy's 10 Hard Truths
Oh,
from his new book, The Future of America First. And we're going deep, folks, beyond the headlines and really trying to unpack the core arguments that he's
mhm.
making. You might find yourself nodding along. You might find yourself pushing back really hard,
Right.
or maybe even surprised by some of what you find in here.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about this book is, he's not just laying out policy points
Go
or
on.
or even really like a typical campaign platform. It's much bigger than that. He's really going for a full-on challenge to how we even think about America's identity, its purpose, like the whole shebang.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And he kicks it off with a truth that's very personal. God is real. And
Mhm.
I just want to say before anyone tunes out, this isn't about, preaching or anything like that.
Right, right.
Ramaswamy talks about his own personal journey and how falling in love with his wife, believe it or not, that's what actually deepened his faith.
Interesting.
And he even admits that he wasn't always, so devout.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a really interesting starting point.
Well, and it's smart, right? Because it makes it relatable. He's not saying, I'm this perfect example of faith or you have to believe exactly what I believe.
Right.
But he is saying that belief in God, was absolutely fundamental to the founders when they created this country.
Yeah, and he even brings up Richard Dawkins, which I thought was fascinating.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because Dawkins, the famous atheist, right?
Right, right.
Um, he's now worried about what happens if Christianity starts to fade away.
Interesting.
What fills that void? Does it uphold those same values? That same idea of, inalienable rights endowed by our creator?
It's the question, isn't it? It's like, even if you're not religious yourself, you should be concerned about what happens when a society loses that kind of shared moral foundation.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so from a very personal truth to one that is, well, let's say it's explosive. The climate change agenda is a hoax. I mean, the gasps when he said this at the GOP debate
Yeah.
were audible.
I mean,
It was like he just threw a grenade into the whole climate conversation.
he did. He did. And you know what?
Hmm.
Whether you agree with him or not, you got to admire the boldness.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't just express skepticism about, the pace of climate change or some of the policies.
Yeah.
He goes after, like,
Right.
the foundation of the whole thing.
Right.
He's questioning the impact of CO2 emissions.
Mm.
He's pointing out how we shifted from global warming to this much broader climate change. And
Which is so much harder to disprove, by the way.
exactly. And he's even highlighting, potential benefits of warmer temperatures, like fewer cold-related deaths, for example.
Right, right. He's saying, hold on, before we dismantle our entire economy and way of life,
Exactly.
let's at least have an honest conversation about, the science, the data, the costs.
Yeah.
And he gets really specific too, like with this whole CO2 pipeline issue.
Yeah.
Farmers being forced to comply with all
Yeah.
these regulations.
That they don't understand.
Yeah, that they don't understand and potentially damaging their land
Right.
for a problem they're not even convinced exists.
It's such a perfect example of how he takes these kind of grand ideas and connects them to, like, the real world impact.
Yes.
He wants us to ask, are these policies truly effective? Or are they just, like, causing more harm than good?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, buckle up because truth number 3 is a big one. Reverse mass immigration. And Ramaswamy throws out a stat that is it's mind-blowing.
Okay.
700 million people, he claims, want to move to the U.S.
Wow.
That's
That's
more than
unreal.
triple our population.
That's incredible.
It's incredible.
Right.
So it's clearly a provocative way to illustrate the scale of the issue, but I think his point is that open borders are simply not sustainable.
Right. And I think, what he's getting at there is that the current system is just overwhelmed. It's being exploited. And he's especially critical of what he calls economic migrants. So these are people who are coming for, better jobs, a better life, not necessarily because they're, fleeing persecution or anything like that.
And this is where he gets really, I think, radical with his proposed solutions.
Okay.
He talks about a safe third country policy, similar to what Australia has,
Well,
where asylum seekers would actually have to apply for refuge in the first safe country that they reach,
You're talking
not
about-
necessarily the U.S.
right. So it's kind of like If we make it more difficult to get to the U.S. and stay here illegally,
Right.
it'll deter that economic migration.
Exactly. And he backs this up too. He's not just talking policy, he's talking economics.
Yeah.
He's saying it's actually much cheaper for us to detain and process asylum seekers in other countries
Right.
than it is to do it here in the U.S.
Interesting.
And he brings up this whole issue of birth tourism, right?
Wow.
Where, mothers, often from, Russia, China,
Right.
they come here
Just to have...
just so their child can be a U.S. citizen.
Wow.
And he even mentions some of these mothers renting their children out to single men at the border just so they can say, oh, we're a family unit.
Oh, wow.
So, it's heartbreaking. It really highlights the human cost of these policies.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that, these aren't just like abstract policy debates, right? We're talking about real people's lives. Right. And the stakes are incredibly high. Really makes you think about the trade-offs involved and whether the system's working as intended. Speaking of hot-button issues, though, his next truth dives right into the culture wars. There are two genders.
Yeah, no kidding. This is where he really doesn't hold back. He even uses J.K. Rowling as an example.
Oh,
How she faced the huge backlash a couple years ago for simply stating that biological sex is real. It's kind of wild how that's even controversial.
It's like we've gone through the looking glass here, right?
Right.
Basic biology is up for debate.
Right.
But Ramaswamy's arguing that this whole blurring of lines between sex, which is biological, and gender, which he sees as potentially a social construct.
Okay.
That this has caused a lot of confusion and led to some potentially harmful policies.
Yeah, and he gets really specific here, too. Like, he's very critical of policies that allow transgender athletes to compete in women's sports.
Right. He says it creates an uneven playing field.
Exactly.
And undermines women's rights.
And he also questions these, bathroom bills.
Right, where people can use the restroom.
Based on their gender identity.
Based on their gender identity, yeah, citing safety concerns.
And it's important to note here that he's not just, throwing out opinions. I mean, he's backing this up with, research, legal precedents, philosophical arguments.
Right.
He even shares a story about meeting a non-binary individual on the campaign trail and really emphasizing the importance of, respectful dialogue, even when there are these fundamental disagreements.
It's a good reminder that, behind all these policy debates are real people.
Yes.
Grappling with these complex issues of identity and belonging.
Absolutely.
So moving on, his next truth is one that I think resonates with a lot of people, regardless of your political persuasion. The U.S. Constitution is under attack from within. And here's the thing. He's not just pointing fingers at one party.
Right.
He says it's a bipartisan issue.
Yeah, he's talking about this growth of what he calls the administrative state.
Right, that massive bureaucracy.
This unelected bureaucracy that's making all these rules.
That impact our lives every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are deciding, like, what's in our food, how much our doctor can charge.
That's right.
I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about it.
And his point is that this shadow government, as he calls it, it operates outside of the normal checks and balances.
Yes.
The way our system is supposed to work.
Right. It undermines our liberty.
Exactly, because these agencies are often making rules that have force of law.
Right.
But without any real oversight from Congress.
It's not very democratic.
Not at all. And to kind of illustrate this, he tells this very compelling story about Bill Bright.
Oh, right.
He was a fisherman who got caught up in this bureaucratic nightmare because these, unclear and seemingly arbitrary regulations.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how this abstract idea actually plays out in the real world.
Exactly.
And hurts regular people.
And his solutions here are just as bold, by the way. I mean, he talks about using executive power to roll back regulations that were never actually authorized by Congress.
Okay.
Reforming civil service protections, to make it easier to hold bureaucrats accountable.
So they can't just like hide behind all these rules.
Exactly. He even suggests like shutting down entire agencies.
Really? Like which ones?
Like he mentions the FBI, the Department of Education.
Wow.
Arguing that their functions could be handled better at the state or local level.
Okay, so whether you agree with him or not,
Sure.
you gotta admit this guy's not afraid of a little controversy.
Not at all. Not at all.
So let's shift gears now to a topic that's very personal for Ramaswamy. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance. And he starts this section off, by talking about his own upbringing in a stable two-parent home,
Right.
and acknowledging the advantages that gave him. But his point is that this should be the norm.
Not the exception.
You're not the exception, exactly.
And he backs this up with some pretty startling statistics about the decline of the family.
Oh, yeah.
Rising rates of single-parent households, births outside of marriage. The erosion of these traditional family values.
It's really concerning when you look at the numbers.
Absolutely. And he argues that this trend has devastating consequences for kids, for adults, for society as a whole.
And he's got the data to back it up.
He does.
He cites all these studies showing that kids who are raised in two-parent homes, they do better in school.
Right.
They're less likely to end up in poverty, less likely to get in trouble with the law.
And adults in nuclear families, they tend to be happier, healthier, more financially secure.
Yeah, it's like he's saying that the family it's the bedrock.
It's the foundation.
You have a strong society. It provides this sense of belonging, stability, moral guidance.
That you just can't get from a government program.
Exactly. And then he contrasts this with what he sees as the downsides of a big welfare state.
Right.
Arguing that it can actually discourage family formation. How so? Because it creates this system where, people become dependent on the government.
Instead of on each other.
And to kind of illustrate an alternative, he points to Hungary.
Interesting. What are they doing?
They have all these pro-family policies.
Yeah.
Things like generous tax breaks for families, subsidized housing, all sorts of things to encourage marriage and having kids. And get this, he says it's actually led to like a mini baby boom in Hungary.
So it's possible.
Yeah, it's a fascinating example of how policy can actually influence like these big cultural trends.
It's a really interesting case study.
Yeah, it is. And speaking of cultural trends, Ramaswamy's next truth is, well, it's definitely going to spark some debate. A new segregationism is here.
That's a bold statement.
It is. It seems counterintuitive, right? I mean, we've come so far since the civil rights movement. But he's arguing that we're actually seeing a new kind of segregation.
Driven by
what he sees as these, like, misguided anti-racist policies.
Oh, interesting. So he's saying these policies, while, probably well-intentioned, are actually making things worse?
Yeah, that's his argument. He says they end up perpetuating racial division.
How so?
Because they treat people differently based on their race instead of judging them as individuals.
So it's like that whole idea of the content of their character versus the color of their skin.
And his prime example of this is affirmative action.
Oh.
He argues that it actually discriminates against white and Asian Americans.
In favor of?
In favor of Black and Hispanic students. He's really critical of the use of racial quotas, especially in college admissions and hiring. He says it creates the system of winners and losers based solely on race.
And not on merit.
And not on merit, exactly.
So he sees this as kind of a betrayal of Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream.
Exactly, that whole idea of a colorblind society. He says these policies actually create a culture of victimhood, where people are encouraged to see themselves as either oppressed or oppressors based on their race.
Which he would argue undermines personal responsibility, individual agency.
And he doesn't shy away from tough examples here. Like, he brings up the allocation of those scarce COVID-19 drugs that were being, distributed based on race. He thought that was really disturbing.
So he's basically saying that kind of race-based decision-making
is inherently unjust.
Yeah. And perpetuates these harmful stereotypes.
He also criticizes the defund the police movement. He says it's led to more crime, more violence, particularly in minority communities.
So for him, true racial justice means
equal protection under the law. and a focus on individual rights, not group identity.
He's really challenging this narrative that America is inherently and irredeemably racist.
Right. He acknowledges that racism exists,
Right.
but he doesn't think it's like the defining characteristic of our country.
Right. And he argues that we should be building on the progress we've made
Exactly.
instead of dwelling on the past.
And that leads directly into his next truth, which is all about national unity. Nationalism is not a bad word. And he starts this section off with a pretty shocking anecdote about Ann Coulter.
Sure.
She's, the conservative commentator.
Right, right.
And she actually said that she wouldn't vote for him because he's Indian.
Wow.
Man, that's really something.
Yeah.
It's like he's using this whole thing with Ann Coulter to kind of set the stage for this idea of what it means to be American
Yeah.
in the 21st century.
Yeah, and to challenge that notion
Yeah.
that, nationalism is automatically racist or xenophobic.
Right. Like, it's not about
Right.
hating other countries.
It's about loving your own,
It's about loving your own country.
wanting what's best for your own citizens,
Right.
regardless of their background.
And, he draws this fascinating parallel
Okay.
between America today and ancient Rome.
Interesting. Okay.
Rome, this incredibly diverse empire,
Right, right.
but they were united by this shared identity.
Right, this loyalty to Rome,
Exactly.
not to their specific ethnic group, not to their religion.
And he's saying, America needs something like that today, some kind of unifying force.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, he's got an idea. And it's pretty radical.
But it is.
He's calling for a mandatory civics test and a loyalty oath
Wow.
for all citizens.
Not just immigrants?
Not just immigrants.
That's just, okay.
He's saying everyone
Yeah.
needs to understand and embrace the core values of this country.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. It's like he's saying, look, this is what it means to be an American in the 21st century.
I got to buy into the whole
You
thing.
gotta buy into the whole thing, and if you don't, well...
Okay, and this ties into, I think, this broader theme throughout his book about American identity, right? What it means to be American in this day and age.
It's not just about, where you're born or your ancestry. It's about buying into this set of ideals and aspirations.
Okay, so we've tackled God, climate change, immigration, gender, the Constitution, the family, race, nationalism. I feel like we've covered it all.
Yeah.
What else does he have?
Well, he's not done yet. He's got 2 more truths for us, and they're doozies. This next one is all about, it's about thinking for yourself. Facts are not conspiracies.
Ooh, that's a tricky one.
It is, because it's so easy to, dismiss anyone who questions the official story.
Right, you just slap that conspiracy theorist label on them and suddenly no one takes them seriously.
Exactly, but Ramaswamy makes a good point, which is that label is often used to shut down legitimate inquiry.
To silence dissenting voices.
Exactly, and he's not saying that every conspiracy theory out there is true.
Right.
But he's advocating for open debate, critical thinking.
Even when it makes people uncomfortable.
Especially when it makes people uncomfortable. And to prove his point, he brings up some pretty controversial examples like Saudi involvement in 9/11,
Okay.
the origins of COVID-19.
Right, right. Those are hot button issues for sure.
They are, and he brings up, evidence that contradicts the official stories, or at least suggests that there are still unanswered questions.
Okay, so he's not necessarily saying this is the truth,
Right.
but he's saying we should be asking these questions.
We should be asking these questions. And he even brings up this really interesting example, Jon Stewart.
Oh, interesting. The comedian.
Yeah, the comedian. He became a big proponent of the COVID lab leak theory.
Right, which was, initially dismissed by a lot of mainstream media. So it's like he's saying sometimes the people who you least expect are the ones who are, like, willing to ask the tough questions.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like we should be wary of anyone who claims to have a monopoly on the truth.
Especially when they have a vested interest in maintaining a certain narrative.
100%. And this ties into, his critique of social media companies censoring certain viewpoints, right? He sees that as incredibly dangerous, this idea that,
That these companies get to decide what's true and what's not. That they
Exists.
become the arbiters of truth.
And so he's calling on all of us to be more skeptical, to think for ourselves, to seek out different
To
perspectives.
be willing to have our minds changed.
Exactly, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Okay, so that brings us to his final truth, right? The 10th one. The culmination of this whole intellectual journey.
It is, and it kind of brings his whole argument full circle. The U.S. Constitution is the strongest guarantor of freedom in history.
No.
And he's not just talking about a document here. He's talking about, like, a set of principles.
A vision.
A vision for a free and self-governing people. It's
Yeah.
like he's saying, look, amidst all the chaos and division, we need to remember what makes America unique.
What makes us exceptional.
Exactly. And for him, that's the Constitution. That's the bedrock.
And he pushes back against this idea of a living constitution.
Right. This idea that it's constantly evolving.
That we can just reinterpret it to fit our modern sensibilities. He's saying, no, that undermines the whole point of a constitution.
Which is?
To provide a stable framework for government. Something that protects fundamental rights from the whims of the majority.
It's interesting. He tells this story about encountering these student protesters on a college campus. They were disrupting classes, advocating for various causes, and they truly believed that they were exercising their right to free speech.
And he's saying,
no, you're actually infringing on the rights of others. Didn't fully understand the principles of the Constitution.
Interesting. So it's this idea that, we can't defend our rights if we don't understand them.
Exactly. And this leads into a larger point he makes about the decline of civic education in America.
Oh, yeah. He's a big proponent of that. He talks a lot about the need for better civics education.
And he's not just talking about, memorizing dates and names. He's talking about really understanding the philosophical underpinnings of our system. Individual rights, limited government, the rule of law.
And he contrasts this with the modern tendency toward specialization.
Mm-hmm.
We're all so focused on our own little niches
Right.
that we often lose sight of the bigger picture.
And so he challenges us to be more like those founding fathers, to embrace intellectual curiosity, to be willing to learn new things, to see connections between different fields.
To be well-rounded citizens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because that's how we solve problems. That's how we adapt to change. That's how we keep our democracy vibrant.
Mm.
So look, Ramaswamy's 10 hard truths, they're not for the faint of heart. These are bold, often controversial ideas, but whether you agree with him or not, he's forcing us to think deeply about who we are as a nation and where we're headed. And that's what this whole deep dive has been about, giving you the information, the different perspectives, so you can form your own conclusions. So as you go about your day, think about these truths. Which ones resonated with you? Which ones did you disagree with? And most importantly, what do you think is the path forward for America? What role will you play in shaping its future? Let's keep asking those tough questions, challenge what we think we know, and never lose that sense of wonder about this amazing universe we're a part of. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep.